Welcome to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, where we equip pastors to take their churches from declining to thriving by pointing them to a new future and a new hope. Join us weekly for encouragement and practical advice in your pastoring journey.
Wow, here we are again with another version of Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton. I'm Dan Hurst. There's Mark Clifton right there.
I'm right here, and it's just Dan and I today.
Yeah, Halleck is still moping over the Broncos losing.
He is.
And when was that? That was so long ago, and he's still... He just won't give it up.
He won't. And Kyle isn't here, so Dan and I just have this cassette recorder we got back in college, and we push the record and play button at the same time, and we're doing this on an audio cassette, so it'll sound great.
So if there are clicks, that's just the way it is.
It's a 45-minute cassette. We got to flip it over. Remember that? You had 30 minutes on one side, 30 minutes on the other, or 45 minutes on one side.
And then remember that you had the regular oxide tape.
Oh, that's right.
You know? And then you went to the chromium, and that was like,
right.
whoa.
That's right. So anyway, we are here, and actually we're in Dan's house.
Yeah.
In your beautiful, beautiful home, your beautiful abode here on the lake. It's great to be here with you today.
A little nice and comfortable here.
But since it's just the two of us, that's a smaller number than normally is in our podcast.
Well, and here's the thing about it. When the two of us get together and talk about this, we can get so brutally honest. There are no pretensions.
There are none whatsoever.
Because we've known each other for, oh my gosh.
All of our lives.
50 some odd years.
Yes.
We've hung around together. And we've been through a lot together. In fact, I was just looking at Facebook.
Yes.
And how you had posted some time ago about your ordination. Mm-hmm. And I remember, that was at Alta Vista, right?
Alta Vista. It was the heat wave that summer of 1980. Remember the heat wave in Kansas City?
Yeah.
Had like 20 days over 100. It was terrible. Well, Alta Vista wasn't air conditioned. It was up in the country, and it was Sunday afternoon. And I noticed in that picture there was a box fan on the floor, and the window was wide open.
And that was your ordination day.
That was my ordination Sunday afternoon, yes.
And you didn't bother to dress up for that, I noticed.
No, I had a suit. I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing a light blue, really like a baby blue, like a Royals baby blue double knit suit. Remember double knit suits? Had a double knit suit with a vest. But, it got so hot there that I took the coat and the vest off and rolled up my short sleeves. And so the picture of me standing there, and, behind me there was a little choir loft there, like 3 or 4 rows. And I noticed one of the pastors from the association, I don't know who it was, but he has bright white shoes. So you can see, if you go to my Facebook page, you see these 2 bright white Pat Boone-looking shoes from 1980.
Pat Boone shoes, oh my
From 1980. But yes, so I was knelt down there. We won't talk. I'll tell you what, let's do another podcast after this one. We'll do one on ordination. So just hold all this, and the next podcast we do will be on ordination.
Well, the whole thing that I wanted, because when I saw that, and I remember, because Alta Vista was a fairly small church.
Oh, yeah.
And you had started this church in Liberty, and I had come to pastor that church, and you had gone to Alta Vista that point.
That's right.
And I got to thinking, did that church grow?
Yeah, yes. Let's go back to the one in Liberty, though. That'll be interesting.
That church.
When I was a freshman at William Jewell College, I was 18 years old, just 18, and a little church split off of another church. I know you've never heard of that happening, but it has happened rarely on occasion. And they found a place to meet above a vacuum cleaner store on the square in Liberty. And I had a relationship, had known some of these people that split from this church through something called lay renewal missions, lay witness missions. We're really getting deep into the 70s now.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
And so they knew I was at Jewell. They said, we don't have a pastor. Hey, would you come preach for us? And so there were 6 or 7 people that met with me for about 3 or 4 months or 6 months at Eastside Baptist Church in Liberty, Missouri. Mm-hmm. And then they called you to be their pastor.
Yep.
And you came up here to do radio, to go to William Jewell, and to be their pastor. And you and I worked together for a few months, and I was the associate pastor of Liberty Community Fellowship. You changed the name, by the way.
Yeah, I did change
from
the name.
Eastside Baptist Church to Liberty Community Fellowship.
Well, we changed the name.
Well, yeah. But even in 1978, to call a Southern Baptist Church a Liberty Community Fellowship was really out there. It was on the
Well, and it caused waves because
it did cause waves.
What was interesting about that was there was a pastor at Second Baptist Church.
Yes,
which was the large white church.
Yes,
First Baptist Church of Liberty was the black church.
Right.
Second Baptist Church was the white church.
Right.
And I can't remember the pastor's. I think his last name was Line.
It was Link.
Link. That's
Link.
It. Link had been my parent, your parents, my parents' pastor.
Because my parents and your parents went to William Jewell. Mm-hmm. And when they were at Jewell, they went to Second Baptist.
Yeah, and Link was the pastor then. And so now I'm at Jewell. He's still the pastor there. And so now I go to this church, start this church, and I go to visit him one day, and he just says, "You're not welcome here." Uh-huh. And I said, "Excuse me?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Who told you could come and start a church here?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I didn't start the church."
Yeah.
I said, "Mark Clifton started the church." So I threw you under the bus. And,
that's all right.
But
it's one of many times I've been thrown under the bus.
That was kind of that was one of the churches that we worked on together.
I think I failed to mention they left Second Baptist. That was the church they left and started. Yeah. Anyway, neither here nor there. But it was a small church. Mm-hmm. And then Alta Vista called me to come be their pastor. And Alta Vista, up in rural North Missouri, white frame church with a cemetery next to it out in the open country, had been closed from about 1956 until 1976. So for 20 years, it did not have any services. It was just a shut-up building. The windows were boarded over. And I had a great uncle named Willie Hereford who retired, sort of, from ministry, and he moved to Maysville, which was near this church, and he would drive by it every day, Dan, and he just couldn't imagine driving by a church that was closed. So I guess that's where I get my genes, right, about this. So he and some men went and they found out who owned the building, and it was all fine, and they got possession of the building again. They took the boards off the windows, they swept the building out, and my great uncle, who was at that point close to 80, began to hold services there. And Alta Vista grew to about 50, 60 people. And then they called me to be their pastor. And I went up and I served with them for a number of years. And in 1980, they ordained me. And that picture is this small church in a rural area. And by the way, Alta Vista is still going. It's still a viable church. Yeah. We built a little addition on it. When I went there, right before I got there, they didn't have indoor bathrooms or anything like that. So they built a little tiny addition that had bathrooms and a little nursery, and it had a little kitchen in it. And it never was air conditioned while I was there. But so that's where, anyway, again, I think I put on Facebook, only eternity is going to reveal the true impact of churches like Alta Vista. That church ordained me. So everything I've done in ministry for the last 45 years, my ordination isn't from a presbytery or from the Southern Baptist denomination or from a school or a seminary. Man, my ministry credentials come from the Alta Vista Baptist Church in Weatherby, Missouri. And it's what my ordination certificate says. The men who signed that ordination certificate, most of them were pastors of rural churches around Alta Vista who came together. And we'll do ordination next time. We're going to talk about ordination. Yeah. But anyway, the point was it was a small church.
All right. So my question is, because most of the people that listen to this podcast,
yes,
all 7 or 8 of them,
that's right,
are with small churches.
That's true.
And they're, for some reason, and I don't know why this is, it's kind of in the Southern Baptist DNA, and that is that if your church isn't growing and getting larger, then you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I never sat at the cool kids table in middle school for lunch, ever. I finally decided I would join band and orchestra. So at least I had a table to sit at, all right? Because there was other table where you didn't, that was my entry, sort of but I always looked over at the cool kids table and thought, what would it be like to sit at that table? What would it be like to be on the starting team of the football team or the basketball team? What would it be like to have the big Letterman's jacket? So eventually I became the manager of the basketball team.
Really?
Yeah. It's a long story, and I won't get into it. But the senior coach of the basketball team knew me because of ministry that I had done and whatever. Anyway, he came to me one day, and he said, hey, I'd like you to be the manager. And I didn't know what that meant, but I did it. And I actually enjoyed it a great deal. I enjoyed being the manager of the basketball team. So I got a letter. I don't know if they do that anymore.
You get a letter for that?
Yeah, you get a letter. Oh. All right. So I went to Chrisman High School, so I had a big C, and I didn't buy the jacket. I'm not gonna. I mean, some of you may be basketball managers. That's great, but I'm not gonna wear because the letter had a little M down at the bottom of it to show that you were a manager, right? But I got the letter. So years later, I mean, my boys have gone home. They've left college. They're married. We were going through some stuff, and one of my sons he saw this letter, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, you lettered in basketball?" I said, "Yeah, that's a varsity letter right there." And he was just amazed. He said, "Tell me about it." And I said, "Well, I don't like to brag and all that stuff." And he goes, "I had no idea," because Crispin was a big high school.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a small town. I was in Kansas City. And finally he said, what's the little M down here on that for? And I said, "That's my initial, Mark." And they put your initial on it? And Jill said, "That's not Mark, it's manager." He was the manager. Anyway, cool kids table. So it's like if your church is growing, yeah, you get to go sit at the cool kids table. If your church is declining, now you got to sit here with the rest of us. That's how I often felt. And I think sometimes as the influence of the church growth movement has sort of created winners and losers. I don't think it intended to do that, but it has done that. Winners are those you whose churches are growing numerically, and the rest of us are the losers, or we would be like you. In other words, that growing numerically is the main thing that we all exist to do. And unfortunately, for many pastors, their sense of worth in ministry is how big their church is and how much it's growing.
But the statistics tell us, I think, that by and large, that's the wrong phrase, but churches aren't really growing, are they?
Yeah, I think we have to come to the realization, and of course you can look this up, Rayner's information shows it, Barna's information shows it, Lifeway's information shows it, church attendance is shrinking. Now, the larger churches, some of them are getting larger, but even then, Rayner has made it abundantly clear that Dr. Tom Rayner, that the age of the megachurch is over. I mean, he has said that. That doesn't mean there aren't any megachurches that are growing, but listen, there aren't near as many megachurches growing today as there were 20 years ago.
Yeah, true.
There aren't near as many new megachurches being built today as there were 20, 25 years ago. And a lot of megachurches today are struggling to figure out how to maintain 20 and 30-year-old campuses that are 4 and 5 blocks large.
Yeah.
And the attendants, their attenders are growing older, and they're not really attracting lots of young people because younger people aren't nearly as interested in going to a megachurch. There are some outliers out there. There are some exceptions, but generally it's not the rule anymore. And the truth of the matter is, as we look across the board, whether it's Southern Baptist or other denominations, attendance is getting smaller. And that's just a reality. And I think it's a reality of the culture we're in, of the time that we're in. We could do a whole podcast on post-World War II and how everything about that was a time of the great cultural winds were at our back as evangelical Christians. And also the baby boomers, there was a huge growth in just the population that we were able to reach. Well, that's not the case anymore for a lot of reasons. So there's a lot of reasons that attendance has declined, Sunday attendance. And what we want to make sure happens is that we don't look at that and say, well, then we have no hope and there's no future and I'm a failure as a pastor. But there are things you can do even when your attendance is in decline that are still meaningful and helpful, and I think that will eventually perhaps cause your attendance to grow. But my point in trying to say this, Dan, is I don't think we can approach it anymore and say, well, how do we grow a number? How do we get larger? I think we have to back it up a minute and say, how do I do church right now? What am I supposed to do right now? Rather than how am I supposed to get my... Back in the 70s and 80s, the question was, how do we get bigger? We have a bus ministry, right? Mm-hmm. We buy 3 buses. Let's buy 8 buses. Let's put 20, 30 kids on a bus and let's move from 200 to 600, you know? Or let's start a huge youth group back in the 70s with all these baby boomers who are now teenagers, and they want to be part of a choir. We were always thinking of how do we grow, and I think at this point, given the way the culture has shifted and changed so much, we have to think, how do we do ministry? How do we effectively do well with what we have?
Well, let's talk about that then. For example, if I were to ask you, I'm struggling. I'm in a church that just doesn't seem to be growing. In fact, it may even seem like it might be declining. Right. Although churches are, it's like a graph. There are seasons of growth, right, seasons of no growth. What's the first thing that you would say to me?
First thing I would say to you is what Jared Wilson has so wonderfully said. He's at Midwestern Seminary. And guys, please, please embrace this. You have to love the church you have, not the church you wish you had. And I think sometimes when we focus on numerical growth, we're in love with the church we would like to have. If I only had a few more families, if I only had some young leaders, if I only had. And it's like, if we could just get to a certain point, then that would be the church that I would love to have. And we sort of desire a church that we would like to have, and that's the one we fall in love with. And we're actually not loving the church that Christ has given us to have right now. Because the church you have may be full of elderly people. It may be full of some dysfunctional people. It may lack leadership. It may be in some ways a dumpster fire. But it's the church you have. And Henry Blackaby always said that your remaining members in your church are not an obstacle to your ministry. They are your first ministry. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just a change of heart to say, rather than just always be dreaming about what the church might look like if we had this, how can I love the church I have in all of its faults and all of its difficulties and all of its struggles and all of its weaknesses? Because, Dan, that's how Christ loves you. Mm-hmm. And all of your weaknesses and all of your faults and all of your struggles, He loves you immensely, and that's our model. So I think it begins with not projecting the church we wish we had and thinking that would be, because I promise you, if you had that church, it wouldn't be perfect either, and you'd be wanting something else if that's where you are. You've got to learn to deeply love the church you have, and that only comes as you engage more with Christ and love Him more, and are willing, this is so important, are willing to set aside your pride and say, look, if the Lord wants me to serve in a church of 15 people, He's got a plan for that. And I can't have my pride all mixed up and say, well, I deserve something better. I'll never forget. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I'm not. Don't even begin, because there's some people around here that know this man, and I don't want to get into trouble, and I don't want to hurt him. But there was an associational leader that I worked with for a number of years who constantly told me, I should really pastor a large church. I have the ability. He said, I go to these big churches and hear these guys preach, and I could do a lot better than that. He told me that. Wow. And I said, well, why don't you think you're a pastor of a large church? He said, it's all political. It's just who you know, and I just don't know the right people. And his whole ministry, he was just soured because he never felt like he got the chance to pastor a large church. And I've never forgotten that. And I thought, dude, you don't have any idea. Pastoring a church of 12 or 15 or 18 people is one of the greatest honors you could have. The Lord's entrusted you with that flock, and only eternity is going to determine the true impact of that. And we create this environment where we're never quite right unless we've got the larger growing church. And that is a Western mindset. Mm-hmm. It's an American mindset. It's a competitive mindset, and it's a damning mindset. So love the church you have, not the church you wish you had.
It occurs to me when you say that and you make that point that you also have to take your people through that.
Absolutely. And they have to love each other. Mm-hmm. The one thing we know Christ wants His church to do is to love one another. Yeah. And if they feel like you're not happy with them, they're not going to be happy with you. And if they feel like you're not content with them, you wish some other people were here and you wish it was a better church, they're not going to be happy with you. Now look, don't be sending me emails. All of us want the church to grow. All of us want people to come to know Christ. We're going to get to that in the second one. But to begin with, the first statement is, love the church you have so they know you love them and you're grateful that they're there. You don't get up on Sunday morning and say, man, we're missing some folks today. The ones you're missing can't hear you say that. Yeah. The only ones that hear you say that are the ones who got there. Mm-hmm. Get up and say, man, I'm so grateful to see every face in here today. I love each and every one of you. I've been looking forward to gathering with you all week long. This is the sweetest moment of my week. How about that instead of, boy, we're missing some regulars today, or our attendance sure is down. That's what I'm talking about.
That's making excuses.
Yeah.
All right, and you said a second thing. So let's talk about what is the second thing that you should do if you're a church that is not growing, or at least not growing the way that you feel it should grow?
Yeah, I think on the second one, what you want to look at is you want to say, you know what, I'm not just the pastor of this church. When I was at Warnell Road or at Alta Vista or at Linwood, there's a ministry here to this community. Mm-hmm. So I would say, number one, as we said, love the church you have, not the church you wish you had. Number two, don't be as concerned with the number of people that show up on Sunday morning, but be concerned about the size of your church ministry footprint in the community. During that week, how many lives have been touched by you or your church members or the ministry of that church in that community that week? People who may never come to your church, people who may be completely opposed to what you have to say, people who may actually be enemies and think the church ought to be outlawed it or it ought to no longer be tax exempt, and you're just draining from the community and say bigoted things. And those people who hate you and say all kinds of mean things against you, or those people who are just sort of benign and don't really care about the church at all, how is your church impacting them? How are you making a difference in their lives? What is the size of your ministry footprint? Listen, I think you need to wake up every day and not be nearly concerned about the size of your Sunday morning attendance, but be concerned about the size of my ministry footprint in this community. If this church were to close today, and the only people that cared about it are the people who attend it, then you have failed. Mm-hmm. Your church needs to be absolutely important and a vibrant part of the fabric of that community. So much so that if your church closed, even people who never attended would say, our community has lost a real asset. These people were really great. They were gracious. They were generous. They were kind. They were helpful. They made a difference in our community. I think that's one thing, no matter whether your church has 15 people or 1,500 people, what is the ministry impact in your community?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about it being a footprint, because the idea is that if there's a footprint, that means you're going somewhere.
That's right.
And so you're establishing a priority not only for yourself and your own personal ministry, but for the ministry of the church itself, which involves, of course, your people. They have to see that perspective, or have that perspective of the church and the church in the community, which really should bring us to a third point, and that is that if you're going to change that mindset, how does that change your ministry in the way you perceive your ministry?
Well, you and I, Dan, we our dads were pastors right after the Second World War, both of them, and they pastored in those glorious years of the late 1940s, early 1950s, and into the 60s when, Southern Baptists were just growing. We didn't know why we were growing. We were just growing. All evangelicals in North America were growing. All the mainline denominations in North America were growing. And so the whole idea of numerical growth became how we identified whether we were being successful or not. Now, let's go back to COVID a little bit. When COVID came and the churches shut down for several months, statistics have proven that more than 30% of the folks didn't return. So you have to ask yourself an obvious question is, were a lot of those false conversions? Were they cultural Christians and not really converted Christians? Because the culture in those days really emphasized being part of a church, being part of that movement, not being outside of the cultural Christianity. And now that, it's just the opposite, I think what we see is perhaps a slimming down of numbers, but maybe the numbers we have are real numbers, and they're really the converted ones. And maybe the Lord's really setting us up to say, look, the time has come to know who really is with us and who really isn't. So I think to some degree that's the case. So what we have to do is not only love the church you have rather than the church you wish you have, not only be concerned about the size of your ministry footprint in the whole community rather than how many show up on Sunday morning, but thirdly, change the scorecard. The scorecard can't simply be, are we bigger this year than we were last year? I don't know if you realize this or not. You can't get bigger every year. Eventually, you'll run out of people on the planet. Okay, it's just not. If your only real understanding of success is that we're growing numerically every year, but Christ gave us a really strong commission when he said to go therefore and make disciples. And so I think what we say is, here's our strategy for ministry in our church. This is our scorecard. It's, are we making disciples who can make disciples that result in the community being noticeably better? And so I would say all of this podcast could be summed up in this one thing. Rather than being overly concerned and identifying your success with how many people come on Sunday morning, you and I as pastors should be concerned and should identify our success in how are we making disciples who can make disciples, and how does that result in the lost world knowing more about Jesus? Okay? Now, if you do that, I think eventually, many times, your church will grow numerically. But don't lose sight of this. Jesus made it abundantly clear at Caesarea Philippi, I will build my church. Yeah. You don't build it, I don't build it, the North American Mission Board doesn't build it, Lifeway doesn't build it, Jesus builds it. And I think when we love the church we have, I think when we love the community that we are in, I think when we are making disciples who can make disciples, I think the Lord looks at us and says, that's a church I will add to. Mm-hmm. And He will grow the church the way He wants to grow it. And so all of this isn't that we don't want to grow numerically. Of course we want more people in the kingdom. Of course we want more people engaged in corporate worship. But we don't start there. We start with loving the church we have, loving the community and serving the community, and a pattern of making disciples who can make disciples. And when we do those things, numerical growth may come, may not come. I mean, it may come. I'll end with this. When I was at Warnell, in Kansas City, we went there and we had 18 on the first Sunday, and after 3 or 4 years, maybe 40 or 50, and I left there after 10 years and maybe 100, 150 max, and that's if I counted some people twice, and that was everybody. But that was a great thing. I went back to Warnell a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's well over 200 now on a regular basis, and doing great. So it may grow numerically long after you're gone,
right?
And that's okay.
Yeah.
We just see this one moment in time here. We don't see the whole picture. We have an incomplete revelation of what's happening in your church. And so don't get caught up on what's happening this Sunday. Realize the Lord may be planting something here that a decade from now, the fruit will be seen, and you may not be there to see it. Mm-hmm. So I hope this has been encouraging to pastors like me, who pastor relatively small churches, normative churches, to love the church you have, to make disciples, to love your community, and let Jesus build His church.
Well, that wraps it up, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about something that's so relevant, I think, for every pastor. At some point in your ministry, you're going through stuff like this, where your church just isn't going or growing the way you think it should be, or the way that you've been told that it should be. Maybe it's time to look and to have a whole different perspective of really what it is we're all about. Thanks for spending time with us, and I hope that you'll share this word with other pastor friends, and maybe even with your own church, and encourage them to just focus on the Lord as opposed to focusing on the whole growth thing. I learned a lesson one time at a church that I was pastoring when I was at Elm Spring, and we'd had a whole bunch of people. It just seemed like people die in waves. Have you noticed that?
Yes,
we had several funerals all within a matter of weeks. And Brother Looney, that was his name. Brother Looney came up to me afterwards. He said, Pastor, if people would just quit dying, we'd grow. Doesn't quite work that way.
I like that. That's pretty good. All right, buddy. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant. This podcast is brought to you by the North American Mission Board, where we help dying or struggling churches regain health for the glory of God and the good of their communities. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. To learn more about becoming a replanting pastor, or to explore resources about revitalization for your own church, visit churchreplanters.com.